All right, so today we're going to look at British imperialism in India. So we're looking at the early 1800s all the way to 1900 and the impact of that. So first off, to understand, British had control of many territories, colonies, whatever you'd like to call them, in the early 1800s, and then they lost some coming up to World War I, and then most of them, pretty much all of them after World War II. But you can see it's not just India, it's also Australia and places in Africa. But in India, that was kind of their crown jewel, I guess you would say. They had trading posts in India, but the company was kept from taking over because the Mughal Empire was so strong at the time. But by the mid-19 or 1750s, they had poor leadership, and the Mughal Empire ends up collapsing to British rule. Not British rule as in the country, but rather the East India Trading Company, which gradually took over more and more land until it controlled all of northern and southern India, and really modern-day Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. So they end up controlling, 3/5 of all of India. A lot of these states princely states are like reliant on the British territories that are now controlled by the company. But really, just so you can see also, Bangladesh and Pakistan were also controlled by the British. And I'll just say too, this is where 25% of the world's population lives now today. Back then it was probably a little less, but it's a huge population that they were controlling. Again, this is a country maybe that made up 3% of the world population at the time. So the East India Trading Company dominates. Remember, it's a company, but it acts as its own country. It is regulated by the British government, but they really can do as they please to turn a profit. And one way they're able to maintain the control is through having sepoys. These Indians were soldiers that were hired by the company, so they had their own military presence. The majority of them were sepoys, but then they had maybe British officers actually in command. So again, this is Britain's crown jewel, and it was the most valuable. It was a huge market. And also they received a lot of goods, raw materials, and they were able to sell their goods back to the Indian people. So they required that they buy the finished products, British products, and they really did their best to prevent Indian competition. Okay, so just to kind of get an idea of what that looked like. Again, here's England way up here. And they used a modern transportation system. It was, they built roads and shipping canals, and they took a lot of agricultural goods from India and then shipped them back to England, such as cotton and whatnot. And later on, they actually end up having cotton looms in India, and so they don't have to necessarily move it. They used the steamships to travel through the Suez Canal, which is right here in Egypt, and it allowed them to go from maybe 6 months of travel down to only maybe 3 weeks. Okay, so the British policies made India produce raw materials for the British, and then they bought the finished goods from England. So that's really where the value was added. All right, and really competition was illegal at different times. All right, economic impact of colonialism. So this really led to a lot of negative impacts. So the British held political and economic power. The cash crops led to less self-sufficiency for the villages. Those products were sold back to England, and a lot of times this led to famine. If it wasn't a great crop, they would still ship much of it to England and leave the Indian people to starve to death. There wasn't social programs or the World Food Aid Program or anything like that. So literally, because they sold the raw material or the agricultural goods to England, people died due to starvation. It also led to deforestation, so they wanted to produce more cash crops and get rid of more forests, which led to just losing a lot of wildlife diversity, and you lose elephants and tigers and just the way people were living. Some positive impacts, though: the British helped build roads, dams, bridges, better roads, telephone, telegraph line, and irrigation systems. And they also built schools and colleges as well. With that, it was more of a Western educational system. Actually having classrooms and teaching curriculum, math, science, English, all of those things. All right, maybe not necessarily English, but you get what I'm saying. Also, there was a shift in nomadic herding to agriculture. So, 1700s, early 1800s, people still had herding, but they switched more to an agricultural, fields and crops instead. Also, there was missionaries that attempted to convert Indians to Christianity, which was mainly a Hindu and Muslim country. And there was a push to end, kind of a positive thing again, a push to end slavery and the caste system, along with traditional practices like sati and other ones that just seem very backwards and odds to the English people. All right. And so really this helped position women higher up in the family, had a little more equal rights because of this. Allow them to remarry and things like this, hold property. So that was kind of the overall big thing. And we want to get to more like on this long, long road to Indian independence. A lot of people would point to this. So this was the first big conflict. It was the Sepoy Rebellion. So they controlled India, but there were pockets of discontent, and many Indians resented their attempts to convert to Christianity and their racist attitudes they had towards the native people that were there. So as economic problems increased, the Indians so did feelings of resentment towards the British and towards the British, and led to Indian nationalism. Because there was famine, there was food shortages, and also now it seems like they're attacking their culture and religion. So there was rumors spread along the Sepoy soldiers that the British greased the cartridges, which are these things right here. So essentially what you do is there's this cartridge, it's prepackaged, looks kind of like this. You bite off the top, you pour the gunpowder down, and then you use the ramrod to put in the bullets. And there was a rumor, and I still have not identified if it was for sure beef and pork fat that was used. It was some sort of greasy material. They actually later switched to beeswax or mutton, which is lamb fat. But either way, the people of India believed that it was likely cow or pork, which is taboo and downright sinful to consume. So they were asked to put these things in their mouth, and that really violates their religion. And so this was very upsetting, and it looked like the English were trying to undermine their religious practices. So when soldiers were, a lot of them fought back, and a lot of them were jailed for not accepting the new rifle cartridges. And Sepoy soldiers marched on Delhi, and the rebellion spread throughout India. Now, there was pockets of this. It's not like there's social media and they can all rebel at the exact same moment or something like that. But this lasted about a year. There was lots of English commanders, but also families that were killed in this. Again, they were resentful. It wasn't just this one thing. This is just one thing that kind of set it off. There was already other problems going on. So it wasn't until the British sent government troops to assist the East Indian Company, who then finally defeated the Sepoys. So the Indians had weak leadership and couldn't unite against the British and Hindus, and partly because the Hindus, they didn't want to return back to Muslim rule like in the Mughal Empire, and some Indian leaders did have their people take part of the rebellion, and a third of the group, or Indian leaders did not have the people take part in the rebellion, and a third of the group, the Sikhs, had remained loyal to the British. So they were not one people. Again, this was Hindus, don't have the same beliefs, but they did fear that they would come under Muslim rule again. And this happens over the next 100 years. They're both fearing control from the other. Okay. So after the Sepoy Mutiny, the British government took direct control of India, with the British governor called a viceroy to be in charge. So the company no longer was necessarily in charge of the country, economy, and basically how everything is run, the governmentship. And anyways, it was replaced with a strict rule from the British Crown. So they actually send their own military troops. There was less Sepoys. There were some still, and some were loyal. But they now relied more on actual English troops. So the rebellion caused British people in India to have more racist beliefs against Muslims and Hindus there. They punished them quite severely, executed thousands by cannon, and no trials. But if it seemed like a group was guilty, they would just kill them. Okay. All right. So also, what's going on here is there is a nationalism surfacing in India. Again, India is very scattered when it comes, not only, there's different pockets of religions, but also just languages too. There's over 200 languages at this time. And there was this nationalism that was going on, kind of a unifying effort, and it was really against the British. So some Indian thinkers like Ram Roy began to believe that India needed to modernize and change traditional ideas like child marriage and the caste system in order to someday not be controlled by outsiders. Kind of sounds like Japan, doesn't it? So nationalist feelings began to emerge in India that resented the treatment and how they were paid like second-class citizens in their own country. And again, that's famine, that's working conditions, not being able to trade or produce the goods they wanted. And so this nationalist group formed. It was the Indian National Congress, and it first fought for specific concerns for India, but were calling for self-government by the early 1900s. All right, so this was Hindus and Muslims pushing back and uniting against the English, but Muslims and Hindus. So really, it became more about self-rule at some point. However, the Muslims, remember that the Mughal Empire was under Muslim control. Now, Muslims, though, began to resent Hindu domination in the Congress Party. There were more Hindus at this time, and there were more representation in this Congress. Because of that, due to fears that the Hindu would dominate this new government, they would end up, they were worried that they were going to be oppressed. So in 1906, the Muslims formed the Muslim League. And this is really to the British advantage. If they can separate these two groups and maybe have them, fight with each other a little bit, but also just not be united, it really benefited them because it allowed them to maintain control. Okay, so it wasn't until later that they actually do get independence. But you can see from this is British India Empire 1909, and you can see the dominant religions. So we have Muslims here. Dominant religion is Hindu here. Right here is more Muslims. So this ends up becoming Pakistan. This ends up becoming Bangladesh. And this ends up becoming, this is Buddhist. So this ends up being Burma or Thailand, whichever one you'd like to call it. So, that religious division that the English was hopeful for ends up splitting the country into multiple countries. It never did come back together completely. But you'll see later on they do come together to push out the British finally in 1947. All right, that's it. Good luck.